Good afternoon, everyone. We will begin the webinar in 2 more minutes. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on managing chemical risks in your supply chain. My name is Anagha, and I will be introducing this webinar. Today's presenter is Mr. Prasad Pant. He is a textile technologist with more than 27 years of experience in wet processing and technical marketing of dyes and chemicals, and is a recognized expert in chemical risk assessment and management, especially in the apparel, footwear, and hard goods industries. To enjoy this webinar experience to the fullest, the audience will be muted to reduce any background noise. In case you are not muted, then you can self-mute yourself by clicking on the green mic icon in the control panel. Please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen to communicate with me if you face any audio-related difficulties or wish to clarify any queries. Please note that all answers to your queries will be taken up in the discussion session at the end of the webinar. Now, in a follow-up email, we will be providing each participant a link to the recorded version of this webinar and also a link to download an unabridged version of this presentation as a PDF file. So now over to you, Prasad.
So thank you very much, Anaga, for the kind introduction and a warm welcome, and a big thank you for every participant for taking out time for this webinar. I have broken up this webinar's agenda into 4 parts. In the first part, we will look at the need for managing chemical risks at all levels of the supply chain. Then I will present from a brand's perspective as well as from the supplier's perspective as to what can be done to manage these chemical risks. And finally, I hope to have a lively Q&A session to address any queries and comments that may come up during this webinar. So I'm moving on to the next slide, and here I would first like to explain about the different types of chemical hazards. The first type is commonly called as physical hazards, which means those chemicals that can cause physical harm to people, property, as well as process. Usually these chemicals are explosive chemicals or flammable chemicals or gases under pressure or self-reacting mixtures or corrosive oxidizing liquids, etc. These chemicals with physical hazards require safety measures for storage to reduce the risks of accidents due to explosion or fire or leakage. So there are quite a few chemicals which we use in textile and leather production which have physical hazards. An example or a common example is sodium hydrosulfide or hydrogen peroxide or caustic soda that we use in our textile and leather production. The second type is commonly called as occupational hazards. These are chemicals due to which workers handling them can get exposed and can result in the risk of skin and eye damage or dusting or odor, irritation, nausea or drowsiness. These risks basically are through exposure of the worker or the person to these chemicals, which can be either through inhalation, that is through the respiratory tract, or through dermal exposure, that is through the skin, or maybe the eyes, and oral exposure or through ingestion of the chemical. So some snapshots of how this exposure can happen are shown here in our daily practice. Hazards that produce short-term or long-term effects on human health are called health hazards. These are generally classified as carcinogenic, that is cancer-causing chemicals, or mutagenic, that is those chemicals that can cause changes in the gene structure of our cell. Reprotoxic, that is chemicals that can damage the reproductive system. And endocrine disruptors, that is chemicals that can mimic hormones and disrupt the endocrine system of the human body. These chemicals are a risk for worker safety as well as the consumer safety. The last type of hazards are environmental hazards, that is the hazards which are caused due to an impact on the environment due to discharge of these chemicals. These can be classified as persistent, that is those chemicals that do not readily biodegrade into simpler harmless substances. For example, our PFCs, which are used for oil and water repellents finishes. Bioaccumulative chemicals, that is chemicals that are not water soluble and hence they keep accumulating in the fat tissue of animals and thereby they concentrate up the food chain. So this is also sometimes referred to as bioconcentration chemicals. The third effect is the aquatic toxicity, that is chemicals that are fatal to aquatic life such as fish, daphnia and algae. Also included in this type of hazard are chemicals which deplete the ozone. They are also part of the environmental hazards. Now we all know that a lot of chemicals that are used in textile and leather manufacture are inherently hazardous and carry a risk if we are exposed to them. Some examples have been shown here. For example, potassium permanganate, which is widely used for the bleach spray on denim garments, is irritating to the nose, throat and lungs. It can cause coughing. It can cause shortness of breath, and on long-term exposure, it can also cause pulmonary edema or what is known as buildup of water in the lungs. Formaldehyde, which is very widely used in resin finishes as well as in dye fixing agents as well as preservatives in certain pigments and dyes, is a suspected carcinogen and can cause sensitization of the skin. There are certain dispersed dyes which are allergenic. So if these residues remain on the end article, then they may lead to certain allergenic reactions on the consumer. And there are certain direct and acid dyes which can release carcinogenic amines under reductive conditions. We all know about plastisol prints, which are used to print on children's t-shirts or what we call as rubber prints on the or chest printing, and these plastisol prints can contain phthalates in order to give flexibility to these prints, and these phthalates have been confirmed as being carcinogenic, and they are also an endocrine disruptor, and they affect the nervous and the immune system of the body. A lot of solvents are used in the textile industry for stain removal, and these solvents have the hazards of being respiratory irritants, as well as a lot of solvents are flammable, and hence they require specific conditions for storage. Sodium hydrosulfide, widely used as a reducing agent in textile processing, is a self-reactive substance. Self-reactive means that this substance can ignite even in the absence of oxygen, and hence if a drum of sodium hydrosulfide is left in the open and if some moisture creeps into the drum, then it can react with that moisture and generate the oxygen required, as well as the reaction is exothermic, and that can lead to the effect of fire. Also, hydrosulfide is harmful if it is swallowed. So these are some examples of chemical risks due to chemicals in production. There are also a lot of chemicals which are discharged into the environment, because not all chemicals used in the production of an article remain on it. Quite a huge amount of these hazardous chemicals are discharged to the environment, where they can impact the ecology as well as affect human health. Some examples I have just giving over here, like we all know, alkyl phenol ethylene oxide condensates, or APEOs, are used widely in detergents, wetting agents, and softeners, and these can get washed out from a manufacturing site through the discharged effluent, and these are toxic to fish. Some phosphate-based chemicals, such as urea and sequestering agents, which are used in textile processing, can also lead to eutrophication. Eutrophication means an uncontrolled growth of algae on a water surface, such as a pond or a lake. And this uncontrolled growth results in a lack of oxygen and sunlight from going into the aquatic species below this water surface. Some chemicals that are discharged can consume the dissolved oxygen in the river bodies, which is available to the fish, and thus the discharged effluent needs to be treated so as to meet the norms of what we call as the chemical oxygen demand, or the COD, and the biological oxygen demand, or BOD. So it is clear to us that managing chemical risks is important. It is basically important to protect consumer health, worker health and safety, as well as to comply with legal restrictions, both for consumer goods as well as wastewater discharge. Several legislations around the world are now getting more and more stringent about chemical residues which can be found in consumer goods. So you have laws such as the CPSIA in the US, or the Washington Children's Safe Product Act, and CalProp 65, which are state laws in the US. We have now the REACH law in the EU. Several laws have come up in China, in Taiwan, in Korea, and in Japan, restricting certain chemicals, harmful chemicals, in finished goods. Legislations are also getting more and more stringent on discharge of the effluent to the environment. We also have now a lot of NGOs which are campaigning for and highlighting the pollution which is caused by the textile industry. An example is Greenpeace's Detox Challenge. And consumers also now insist to know what is behind and in the product. And all this has really increased pressure on the brands and retailers to manage chemical risks in their supply chains. So what are the top 4 reasons for managing chemical risks? One, of course, is to enhance the brand's reputation as one that cares for the consumer and the environment. In today's business environment, cost, quality, and delivery are not enough to differentiate a product. Hence, measures taken by a brand to demonstrate a positive attitude towards corporate responsibility become an important factor. Several global brands initiate sustainability measures across their suppliers and monitor chemical restriction compliance through their RSL and MRSL documents, that is the Restricted Substances List and Manufacturing Restricted Substances List documents, as well as through testing of the finished products. The ZDHC initiative, which now goes beyond just finished product compliance to zero discharge of hazardous chemicals, across all pathways, that is wastewater, sludge, as well as air, is also a measure to enhance brand reputation. Chemical management can also give a competitive edge to a supplier. Brands and retailers do not want to see harmful chemicals put into their products or into the environment, and want to do business with compliant factories. Good chemical management practices can give you more orders for your business. Also, reducing accidents will automatically improve your productivity, which will give an edge in terms of your delivery schedules. Chemical management can also save costs. Reduction in chemicals or proper selection of chemicals that can reduce the effluent load can save the effluent treatment and disposal costs. Innovation can also be achieved through replacing hazardous chemicals with safer chemicals. Examples are Patagonia's Because Denim is Filthy Business initiative. You can go on their website and have a look at this, where no synthetic pesticides or fertilizers are used in the cotton growing, and no toxic dyes or hazardous chemicals such as sodium hydrosulfide, which is normally used in denim processing, has been included in the preparation of this denim. Levi's Waterless program also includes innovative processes to save water and chemicals. So with managing chemical risk can also lead to a lot of innovation. So let us now see how brands can manage chemical risks in their supply chains. For this, we suggest what we call as the SEAM approach. SEAM or SEAM stands for Set Up, Program, Evaluate, Actualize, and Measure and Monitor. So let us go through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. In the setup program step, a brand should work, or rather a brand should form a working group to manage chemical risks in their supply chain. Such a working group can be drawn from the sustainability, quality, sourcing teams, as well as regional licensing offices located at different countries. The working group members should have defined responsibilities and should work out the program scope, timelines, milestones, and budgets for chemical management in their supply chains. It is of course necessary at this stage to map out vendor data such as geographical location, organization structure, volume of business done, the level of influence that the brand has at these vendors, the vendor capability on chemical management practices, as well as its attitude, the type of product line made at each vendor, what kind of relationship that the brand has with the vendor, whether it is a long-term or a short-term relationship, etc. So all these factors need to be documented about the vendor details. And the next step is to buy in or secure a commitment from these vendors for implementing chemical management practices at their facilities, as well as at downstream suppliers. The next step is to evaluate these vendors for their understanding of chemical compliance requirements as well as issues. This could be about their knowledge of brand RSL documents or other chemical documents such as the safety data sheets, or about local and global regulations on chemical restrictions. This is an important step because before we start actualizing any actions, it is very important that there is a thorough understanding of the chemical compliance requirements. The evaluation of a vendor should also be done either through an on-site audit or through a self-assessment checklist on different aspects of chemical management, such as internal chemical purchasing practices, whether a risk assessment of their chemical inventory is being done by them, how do they communicate with chemical and raw material suppliers about chemical restrictions, what are the chemical storage, handling and disposal practices, whether any preventive actions are taken in cases where outputs are non-compliant, and what kind of waste management practices the facility has for wastewater and solid waste. An important aspect also during the evaluation step is to evaluate whether the vendor has an oversight of their downstream suppliers and what kind of level of influence the vendor has over its downstream suppliers. The next step is to actualize after the evaluation step is done and data is analyzed. Firstly, we can start with training the vendors and their downstream suppliers on chemical management topics. These could include topics such as restricted substances or chemical safety or even wastewater management. Other measures include implementing a chemical management team which takes the responsibility of moving forward the chemical management process at their facility. Control measures to mitigate any risks from identified chemical hazards or from the risk management or from the risk assessment. Conformance declarations from chemical and raw material suppliers. Phase out and substitution of risky chemicals. Whether there is a smart testing plan or a protocol to test inputs, that is raw materials and chemicals for restricted substances, and implement hazard communication through labels and signages. The last step is to measure and monitor the progress which is made in managing chemical risks. One can think of a digital platform to record and share data on actions taken on a continuous basis. Suppliers can then upload documents about their chemical inventory or conformance declarations or any other actions which are being taken by them onto this platform so that this data can be analyzed and monitored by the responsible person in the brand. Other measures to monitor progress are due diligence testing of outputs, that is the finished articles and wastewater, regular review of chemical documentation such as the chemical inventory, safety data sheet, and the conformance declarations from chemical and raw material suppliers. Corrective actions which are implemented for continuous improvement, and self-assessment checklists which can be completed and uploaded by the supply chain. As part of the SEAM process, a brand should also be ready with their chemical policy documents, which would include the restricted substances list or the manufacturing restricted substances list or any kind of chemical management guidebooks which they would like their supply chain to follow. They should also decide on the resources required for the chemical risk management program, both internal as well as the need for any external project partners or consultants. They should develop an audit and testing protocol for evaluation of vendors and data management systems as well as disclosure systems for chemical compliance. An important aspect is to ensure the management or corporate commitment from the brand organization and ensure that chemical risks or chemical risk management is given high priority in the business strategy. A brand should support and train their direct vendors and their downstream suppliers and resolve any chemical management challenges that may be faced by them. The vendors and suppliers should in turn engage with their raw material and chemical suppliers and bring them on board to achieve the actions which are outlined for chemical management in their facilities. So now let us examine how vendors can manage chemical risks. Well, the first thing that or the first action that the vendor should do is to form a chemical responsible team. The main member of this team would be a centralized authority who is responsible as well as empowered for chemical management. And the word empowered is quite important here, because this central authority or the chemical responsible manager should be empowered to take decisions regarding chemical compliance or chemical related issues in the facility. Such a person should preferably have some chemical management exposure and understanding, and if there are any shortcomings, then this should be covered with proper training. This central authority should coordinate with other departments of the facility. That could include the production manager, the quality manager, the effluent treatment plant manager, as well as the purchase and stores in charge. The members of this chemical responsible team should have defined roles and responsibilities so that each team member knows what exactly is to be done in this chain of actions that are required for chemical management. All communication to internal and external stakeholders, such as chemical suppliers or raw material suppliers, should be done through the chemical responsible person, so that there is a single window of contact and the corrective actions from the facility or the vendor's side. All new chemicals which are purchased and which will be required to be purchased should be screened through this chemical management team for the restricted substances requirements as well as for hazards before it is taken for bulk usage. The team also monitors elimination of hazardous chemicals, and all members of this team should be trained for a thorough understanding of chemical management. The next step for vendors is to conduct a chemical risk assessment. For this, it is very important to maintain a full chemical inventory of all chemicals which are used not only directly in the production processes, but also sundry chemicals which may be used in for utilities or in the laboratory or for effluent treatment or even for sanitary purposes. Chemical documents such as safety data sheets and the chemical labels on the containers should be used to identify the physical, health and environmental hazards of each chemical in this inventory. Also, we should identify intentional and unintentional usage of restricted substances in these input chemical formulations through supplier declarations and also through random testing. All these hazard data as well as restricted substances data should be then recorded for the chemical inventory so that we can develop control measures. An example of how to create a chemical hazard mapping sheet to monitor the hazards as well as document any precautionary actions is shown here. So this table, in this table, you can list out the supplier name, the commercial name of the chemical, the category, that is whether it is directly used in production or at other areas, what is the function and use, what is the average consumption, whether the MSDS is available or not, and from this MSDS, whatever physical, health and environmental hazards have been identified through the R phrases or the H statements, as well as discussions with chemical suppliers should be documented, and precautionary actions should be recorded. The third step is to develop and implement control measures. So once this chemical risk assessment is complete, we should plan the control measures to mitigate these risks. Firstly, segregate and store separately all flammable and self-reacting chemicals along with proper fire safety precautions. During storage, we should also ensure about compatibility of chemicals. So non-compatible chemicals should be stored in a proper fashion and away from each other. Implement the appropriate PPEs or personal protective equipment which are required for workers handling hazardous chemicals so as to reduce exposure to these hazardous chemicals through the skin, nose, body eyes and mouth. Wherever applicable, especially in case of inhalation hazards, one should install local exhaust ventilation or LEVs or other engineering controls to mitigate these inhalation hazards. Also, those chemicals which have been identified as having contaminations or intentional use of restricted substances should be phased out with safer alternatives. Next is to screen input chemicals for restricted substances. Here we should build a consolidated list of restricted substances for compliance by chemical suppliers. Many vendors and suppliers, raw material suppliers, cater to different brands who have different requirements of their restricted substances list and different limits. It would be a good idea to consolidate a list and take the strictest limit of your buyers and ensure that these are complied by the chemical suppliers. Communicate these specific requirements to all chemical suppliers as well as downstream raw material suppliers, and then secure conformance declarations for these restricted substance requirements from all these suppliers. Those chemicals which are listed as non-compliant or which are known to be non-compliant should be phased out. So we can prepare a phase-out list and substitute these non-compliant chemicals with safer alternatives. Also, we must ensure, as I had said earlier, that any new chemical additions which are used for bulk production are screened properly by the chemical management team to meet these restricted substances requirements. It is important also to monitor the reduction and elimination of restricted substances and hazardous chemicals that are used in the facility. One of the ways is to introduce what we call as a smart testing of finished articles. This testing protocol is done based on the knowledge of substrate, process and chemical inputs which are used on the substrate. So based on this knowledge, we can prepare a smart testing protocol of which restricted substances groups need to be tested for monitoring the reduction and elimination of these substances. The testing for restricted substances can also be done at a product sample development stage, so that before the product goes into bulk development, the compliance or the chemical compliance requirements are already tested and confirmed. A root cause analysis for non-compliance should be done always to initiate preventive actions. So if there are any failures in the finished articles, root cause analysis exercise must be done and recorded so that such failures do not occur in the future. Routine testing of wastewater should be done not only for general chemistry parameters such as COD, BOD, pH, and total suspended solids, but also for the presence of any restricted substances. And similar to the finished goods, such any non-compliance should be subjected to a root cause analysis. For testing requirements, it is important to select the correct laboratory which has an ISO 17025 accreditation, capable manpower, as well as whose scope includes eco-testing. It is also important for the chemical responsible manager to determine what to test and at what frequency. As an example, legal requirements must always be tested, whereas continuity products can be tested randomly rather than routinely. The last step is also to manage the waste disposal. Here it is very important that the effluent which is or the wastewater which is generated from the production processes is treated through an efficient effluent treatment plant, preferably with primary, secondary as well as tertiary treatment. We should always ensure that compliance to legal limits as well as brand expectations on zero discharge of hazardous chemicals through wastewater are met. Hazardous solid waste as well as the sludge which is generated in the effluent treatment should be disposed of as per local legal norms to authorized third-party waste contractors, or sent to secured landfills or incineration as may be the requirement. ETP should be monitored regularly for its efficiency through sampling and testing for key parameters such as pH, color, COD, BOD, total dissolved solids, total suspended solids, and temperature at various stages of the effluent treatment plant. The working of the secondary treatment can also be monitored through the determination of the MLSS and the dissolved oxygen parameters. All these testing and monitoring should also be backed up with proper records, and the trends which are available should be analyzed to take any corrective or preventive actions. One can also think of looking at input chemical management, that is selecting the right chemicals with very low COD and BOD inherent values so that we can reduce the load on the effluent treatment plant. As an example, acetic acid is widely used in the textile industry for various dyeing and neutralization purposes. And if we replace acetic acid with formic acid, then the COD, that is the chemical oxygen demand load on the effluent treatment plant, reduces by almost 1/3 of the original value. So vendors and suppliers should take a holistic approach for chemical management and compliance. This includes input control, process control, and output control. Input control means that all raw materials and chemicals which are coming into the facility and are used in production or sundry applications should be compliant with the RSL and MR. Process control involves safe storage and process conditions to ensure worker safety and reduce accidents. This involves measures such as appropriate PPE or first aid or provision of the right firefighting equipments, emergency response measures, as well as spill and leakage controls. Output controls involve testing of the finished articles, wastewater, sludge, and air emissions to ensure that they meet legal norms as well as brand expectations for restricted substances. Any non-compliance to these norms should be analyzed for root cause, and corrective and preventive actions should be taken on the same. So that brings us to the end of my presentation. So over to you, Ananga.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now open the discussion session for the webinar. Okay, thank you very much. We will now open the discussion session for the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen and we will answer them. Okay, we have one question. Could you advise the source of cyanide in wet processing, particularly which chemical or dyes will liberate cyanide in process?
Well, if you are talking about the textile processing, I do not think there is any chemical which will liberate any cyanide, but yes, potassium cyanide is widely used in metal industry, in electroplating. From there it can be generated.
We have another question from Ida. Uh, as you know, we are not experts for chemicals. How do we choose the chemicals?
Well, the chemical screening basically begins with first preparing your chemical inventory. So you list out all the chemicals which you are using in your production site, list out the supplier, and try and collect the latest MSDS from the suppliers. The MSDS is, or the Material Safety Data Sheet, is a very, very useful document that can help you to identify certain hazards which are hazardous ingredients in your chemicals. That should be the first step. The section 2 of the safety data sheet highlights the or the hazard statements as well as the pictograms. So here the description of the hazard is very clearly given by the chemical supplier. The other section that we can look at is section 3, which tells about the hazardous ingredients with the CAS numbers. So here the CAS number is the chemical abstract service number of the hazardous ingredient. So what one can do is to look at the CAS numbers which are given as a hazardous ingredient and check whether this CAS number appears in the RSL or MRSL document which has been given by a brand. And if such a CAS number is appearing, that means that such a chemical should not be used because it lists out a particular restricted substance which is not intended to be used in the facility. The second way that one can do is to circulate or communicate the RSL and MRSL documents from brands or your buyers, and ask for compliance or conformance declarations from your chemical suppliers. Such a conformance declaration can be standardized by the facility, and you can provide them a standard format in which the chemical supplier should declare which products being supplied by them conform to these RSL or MRSL requirements, which products do not conform, and which products they are not knowledgeable about or they don't know about. So the category A would be those products which comply, the category B would be those which do not comply, and C would be where they don't know. And such products should actually be either tested or taken to the phase out list. So in this way, you can try and select the right chemicals from your chemical supplier. So there is a question that in the STEAM approach, the first step is set up program in which a buy-in approach is written. Can you explain this? So, well, but what I mean by buy-in approach is that once the brand has mapped out its supply chain, its direct vendors, it is very important for the brand to communicate or give an overview of the whole project or the program to their vendors and secure their commitment. That is what I meant by buy-in. It is very important to understand that no program for chemical risks will be successful unless there is a commitment and a positive attitude from the vendors and their upstream suppliers. So it is very important to buy in that commitment, not just through a piece of document, because if you just give them a document, then yes, they will just sign and maybe give the commitment, but also to make them understand that such a commitment is going to be of an advantage to them. There's a question, what is a workplace hazard map and is it related to chemical management? What are the basic requirements? Yes, in some factories, they do initiate something called as a workplace hazard map. That is depending on the kind of process which is being done in a manufacturing unit and the type of chemicals which are being used. And based on the hazards of these chemicals, you can actually work out a hazard map to sort of communicate the hazard to the workers who are working in that area. For example, if you have a potassium permanganate spray in a laundry, or a lacquer spray, or you have a process where very hazardous chemicals are being used, then that hazard map can be put up at this place to communicate the hazards. Can you explain about screening input chemicals? Yes, what I meant by screening input chemicals is screening them for presence of intentional or unintentional hazard restricted substances. One method to screen is to identify the hazards through the safety data sheets, and the other is to circulate and communicate the RSL and MRSL documents of your buyers to chemical suppliers as well as raw material suppliers, and get conformance declarations from them so that you are more knowledgeable about what type of chemicals, what kind of substances are being used in these chemical formulations. The third alternative to screen chemicals, of course, is through input chemical testing, which is always a little bit of a costly affair, but it might have to be resorted to in cases where there is no definite knowledge about the presence of restricted substances. In such case, a sample of that chemical can be tested for presence of a particular restricted substance. The question is, what about basic chemicals that are hazardous but no substitute? Yes, a lot of basic chemicals such as caustic soda or hydrogen peroxide have to be used, and there are no substitute for that. But these hazards are to be then controlled through control measures. So as I explained, there are always certain physical and health hazards or occupational hazards where we have to reduce the risk. See, it is not necessary that if a chemical is hazardous, it is not to be used at all. It doesn't mean that we have to just keep on eliminating hazardous chemicals. What is more required is to assess the chemical risk. That is, risk is always equal to hazard multiplied by exposure. So unless you are exposed to that unit, although the chemical may be hazardous, there may be no risk. So the idea to manage basic chemicals where there are no substitutes is to reduce the exposure, either through proper protective equipment given to the workers, or even through the process of automation, automated dosing of these chemicals. So there is no physical contact of the workers with these chemicals. Is there a standard method to dispose expired chemicals, is the question. There is no standard method, but yes, there is all suppliers or all vendors should initiate a process which is called as chemical clean out. That is, you should have something called as an expiry date of the chemical, and those chemicals which are beyond this expiry date should be routinely and regularly disposed of. There are two ways to do this. One is to talk to your chemical supplier and return these expired chemicals back to them. Or the second is to dispose them through third-party contractors, authorized third-party contractors as hazardous waste. What about MSDS where there is no CAS number for chemicals? Well, I'm not very sure what this question is about, but I gather that yes, it could be possible that certain SDSs are not complete. Many times we come across SDSs where the complete information about the hazards is not provided, and in such a case, it is important for the chemical responsible manager to study this MSDS and discuss with the chemical supplier to provide the incomplete information. It is mandatory under GHG in an MSDS, any hazardous ingredient which is part of a preparation or a mixture should be mentioned with the CAS number and along with the concentration of that ingredient used in the formulation, either as a percentage or as parts per hundred. Well, there's a question, what is the value of LD50 and LC50 of a good chemical? Well, this is a little bit of an advanced question. LD50 is lethal dose 50, which is a measure of oral toxicity or dermal toxicity, and LC50 is a lethal concentration value, which is a measure of the aquatic toxicity. That is, if the chemical or a dyestuff is discharged to the environment, then whether it can be toxic to the fish or other aquatic life. There is no real standard norm for this, but in general, an LD50 value of more than 2,500 milligram per kilo is taken as a safe chemical, or it is deemed as safe. The LC50 value is a little dicey. Lower the LC50 value, higher is the toxicity. Generally, an LC50 value of less than 1 milligram is highly toxic, and LC50 value of 100 milligram is toxic as per the classification of GHS. An LC50 value of less than 1 milligram per liter is classified as very toxic to the aquatic life. LC50 value of less than 10 is taken as harmful, and LC50 value of less than 100 milligram per liter is also taken as harmful to the environment. However, we should always remember that LC50 value is on and must be related to the biodegradability value of a chemical. So even if a chemical has a high toxicity, for example, if its LC50 value is less than 1 milligram per liter, but its biodegradability or ready biodegradability is very high, say it is 95%, then also it is possible to use such a chemical, because your risk of toxicity to the fish is drastically reduced due to the high biodegradability. So as I keep saying, it is not just, we should not just go with the hazard values or the intrinsic hazards. It is very important for us to determine the chemical risk or calculate the chemical risk by also calculating what is the exposure as well as the usage of that chemical at the factory. There's a question, do basic chemicals have an RSL and MSDS, and how to control chemicals used for sanitary purposes? Well, basic chemicals do have an MSDS. Many of these basic chemicals are not, may not have been purchased directly from manufacturers, but you can go onto the onto Google and you will get the MSDS from other data sources, and you can study this MSDS for these basic chemicals and ensure that the hazards which are mentioned over there are properly taken care of. About RSLs, yes, RSL is a restricted substances list which contains all the restricted substances which are present in a chemical formulation, and for your sanitary chemicals, you will have to talk to the suppliers of these chemicals and get declarations from them that these listed restricted substances are not intentionally used in these sanitary chemicals. Well, there is a question which is a little bit outside the scope of this webinar, but I'll try to answer it in brief. It is, what is the use of sludge? Can we use this in cement? Well, the use of sludge, yes, of course, sludge is a waste, and it is a hazardous waste which is generated. there is now a practice or an innovative use of sludge in the cement industry. Some facilities use it to make mix it with cement and make bricks which are used in-house for making walls or pathways. It is also now being studied to be used as a fuel for the cement industry. So where you can have, because cement manufacturing is done at very high temperatures, so the sludge will get incinerated as a fuel for the cement industry. Well, there's a question called, all my maintenance chemical suppliers are dealers and not manufacturers. What should I do? Yes, this could be a problem. Your maintenance utility chemicals are not really bought from the direct manufacturers. But I think I can only suggest that you should talk to these dealers. You should get the details of these manufacturers and get in touch with them and try to get the details on the chemical documents related to these utility chemicals. It is a challenge, I know, but if you take the right efforts, I think you can get the right information. There's a question that, do we need an MSDS or a test report if we have a CIL and a PSD? Well, I think this is a question from a Levi's supplier, because Levi's has this documentation called the Chemical Information Log and the Priority Substance Disclosure Form as part of their chemical management stewardship program. Yes, we should have an MSDS in spite of a CIL and PSD, because the SDS also gives you an indication about the physical hazard as well as the environmental hazard. The SDS is your key document for planning control measures and worker safety, as well as to reduce chemical accidents. So yes, we should have MSDS for all your chemicals in your inventory. There's a question, what is replacement of caustic soda, soda ash and peroxide? Well, there is, as we had spoken earlier, these are basic chemicals which are used extensively as inputs for various processes. There are no replacements, but to mitigate any risks from these chemicals, what we have to ensure is proper control measures, such as reducing the exposure through protective equipment and ensuring their proper storage. For example, when you store hydrogen peroxide, you should ensure that non-compatible chemicals such as say sodium hydrosulfide is not stored next to it, because peroxide is an oxidizing agent and hydrosulfide is a reducing agent. Or when we ensure that we have caustic soda storage, then we should ensure that there is no direct physical contact, as caustic soda can cause certain skin burns. So a proper protective gloves or rubber gloves should be provided to the workers when handling these chemicals. Well, formic acid can reduce COD, but what is more hazardous, acetic acid or formic acid? Well, if you're talking in terms of the health hazard, that is the impact of the acid on skin or skin corrosion, definitely acetic acid is more corrosive than formic acid. The only issue is formic acid is costlier than acetic acid, and hence due to cost reasons people do prefer acetic acid usage. I think it was quite a lively question and answer session, and I thank everybody who have participated in this webinar. As I said, Nimcatech Technical Services is a premier organization which provides support for your chemical management requirements. We do this through a training. We have an online training platform called as Notes, where you can receive online training on various aspects of chemical management, such as restricted substances, understanding an MSDS, chemical management elements for compliance, and even modules on wastewater treatment. We also offer hand-holding to the suppliers of global brands for implementing chemical management systems at their facilities. So if you do have any queries or any requirements from your site, the email address is here and our phone number is here. And you can also check out all our services at www.nimcatech.com. So thank you very much for attending this webinar, and I am still available offline also if you have any queries about this webinar. As I said earlier, we will send a recorded version, a link of the recorded version, as well as a copy of this presentation for your ready reference through a separate email. Thank you, everybody.